So in this video I'm going to show you how to remove the a couple of different things, but basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get to the bearing for the cooling fan clutch down there. It's hidden inside this housing here. It has gone bad on this car. Now I'll be honest, a weird kind of thing about this, I'm actually shooting this video after I've taken everything apart, and I'm filming it as I'm putting it back together, but I'm going to describe everything as though I'm taking it apart. So any of you continuity experts out there may catch little mix-ups that I make along the ways, but I'm going to try to get everything sequenced well, and by having gone through the whole thing of taking it apart and now putting it back together, I hope to give you a pretty good series of steps to be able to get in there. This video probably also will work well in regards to if you need a video how to remove the alternator, or if you need to know how to get to remove the water pump down below. So it covers quite a few different things. I mean, we're going to end up taking the belt tensioner off, we'll end up taking the alternator off, we'll take the cooling fan clutch off, we'll get the power, I'm sorry, I keep wanting to say power steering pump, but it's the water pump down there off of this, and then we'll get the entire bracket that holds that bearing out too. The reason why I did this is I saw a post about a way to be able to press that bearing out while it's still in the car. It really seemed a little bit sketchy to me. They're talking about heating up the housing that the bearing is in, but that housing is aluminum, and I just get a little bit scared about trying to press stuff out while it's still in the car, plus I don't have all the specialized tools. So my idea is, and it worked out quite well, is take these accessories off, pull the entire bracket off, which actually is from here all the way down through the power, there I did it again, the water pump below. There's a kind of a flat bracket that holds that bearing, and then I just took it to a shop and had them press the bearing out and press the new one in, and they did that for 38 bucks. So it's far superior of an approach to me than trying to get that bearing out while it's still in the car. So the first thing I'm going to do, disconnected the negative terminal on the battery. Second thing I'm going to do is just remove this plastic cover off the engine. It's not necessary, but what that does is it allows me a little more light and access into the engine while I'm working, which helps out. So the basic steps are going to be remove this housing, going to remove this intake, this air intake hose to give myself room. I'm going to untension the belt, remove the belt tensioner. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the cooling fan clutch and pulley off of the spindle and set it to the side while still in the engine compartment. Then remove the alternator and set it to the side to give myself room. That'll give me a little more working room to get down to the water pump, set it right that time. And once all those accessories are off, then there are 6 bolts that hold that plate on, the mounting bracket on, which is kind of long. Remove those 6 bolts, drop the bracket out through the bottom of the car, because I have taken the under tray off already. That would be a step in there, and then take it to a shop. Basically the installation is the reverse, and just go through it. It's a little weird that you take the clutch, the cooling fan clutch off first and then the alternator, but the reason why is that ends up blocking the cooling fan pulley here, ends up blocking a bolt, and I'll kind of show that along the way. Thanks. Hope this video is helpful to you, and good luck. Okay, as we start into this, one of the first things we're going to do is remove this end of the air intake. That's just going to give us some room to work. As tempting as it's going to be to remove this coolant line, I saw in another video, gentleman talked about how you can loosen this up with a clamp and everything, but he said that every time he does that on one of these cars, he ends up breaking this end. So he avoided doing that. He just didn't do it. He just took off the air intake hose. So I was too nervous to try to disconnect that. It was kind of a pain in the butt to work around, but I didn't. So I just disconnected the air intake hose, And that's just a 7mm little nut on the hose clamp, and did that and shoved it aside and allowed for a lot more working room around in there. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to relieve the tension off the belt that runs the alternator, the cooling fan, and the water pump down below. And the way that's done is there's a belt tensioner here, spring-loaded belt tensioner. Put a 17mm open-end wrench on it, and you can just pull on that towards the driver's fender, and that relieves tension off of the belts. Though some of the other visual sequences you're going to see don't represent this, after removing tension from the belt, the smartest thing to do is actually to remove the complete belt tensioner. That's easily done by just removing these 3 hex head bolts and then lifting it out. The 2 lower bolts, as you can see here and here, can easily be loosened and pulled straight out. The top one actually gets obstructed by the shroud, but what you can do is you can loosen it enough that the entire thing comes out even with the bolt still in it, and set that to the side. That's going to give you more room to work with the fan below. Okay, a quick note about the sequence of things as you're disassembling. What you're going to do is you're actually going to remove the fan and clutch off the bearing first, followed by movement. You're going to move the alternator second. The reason why is the clutch fan pulley there, the cooling fan clutch pulley, actually blocks the lower bolt. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to remove the pulley first, then you'll remove the 2 bolts for the alternator, set the alternator aside, and that'll give you enough room to start lifting out the pulley and clutch assembly and the fan. Now ready to disengage the clutch from the bracket and the bearing. And the way that this is done is there is a bolt, an 8mm Allen bolt, on the back side of the bracket that goes through the bearing and attaches to the clutch. So we've got a 8mm socket back here, and I will attach a wrench, of course, to loosen this up. To hold the clutch in place as we turn it, and it is a drift punch, that there's a nice little bracket here in the main bracket above the bearing that holds the punch, and you can see the tip of the punch coming all the way through the clutch. The pulley, there's a hole, there are a couple holes in the pulley that allow that drift to go through, and that'll do a great job securing the pulley in place as we loosen the bolt. Now, a couple of times I've read that it suggested that this is an opposite thread, but it isn't. It's just lefty-loosey with the wrench in it, standing by the driver's wheel well. I'm just going to pull this towards myself, and that will break that bolt loose. Really won't be very hard, and we'll get that out of there. Now that we got the bolt removed off the back side of the bearing holding the clutch, the fan clutch in place, we're just going to slide the clutch off the bearing shaft this way, freeing it up. We're then going to lift it up partially out of the engine, and to do that it is going to require a little bit of force, and we're going to have to be very careful and gentle as we kind of flex this plastic fan to allow the clutch, the bottom of the clutch, to clear the bearing and the bracket that it's on. But we can do it, just have to be gentle and careful and make sure that you'll have to be forceful, but you'll just be careful not to crack the fan. With the clutch removed off the bearing, I find that I still can't really get the entire fan and clutch assembly out as one piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the fan from the clutch, because I can, see if I can jiggle it around here a little bit, I can get access to these bolts, which are really easy to get off. So there are 4 of these little Allen heads. I'll undo those. The fan will separate from the clutch, and I'll be able to take both pieces out separately, and it'll be no problem. Okay, our next step is going to be to remove the alternator out, and that involves a couple of different things. First of all, we're going to remove this this Allen head up here, and then there's another 8mm, a big 8mm Allen head down at the bottom. The alternator, kind of see from, can't really see it, in the side. The alternator is actually kind of squeezed in. There's a bracket. The alternator itself actually kind of pinches as a fork on the main bracket that we're releasing, so it's a little bit tight in there. So what's easiest is once we take out these Allen bolts, it's still going to be connected in the back by the wires, and we'll take those out after we've actually fully removed the alternator we're going to keep it within the engine compartment, but we're going to move it off of the bracket, and then we'll remove the wires because it gives us a little better access. So what we'll do is we'll remove these two bolts, and then what we'll do is we're going to use like a screwdriver or a pry bar to actually pry this out of position. But it is just two bolts, so once you get those out, it's pretty free. Now a little note for installation. The easiest thing is to get this bolt lined up in top, and I'm going to have another little snippet that kind of shows how to use a mirror to do that. Second thing is get the top bolt in, and then we're going to position for the bottom bolt. The easiest way to do that I found is actually to use this big screwdriver down in between here, between the main bracket and the alternator, and kind of snug it, use it to just kind of leverage, and the mirror to kind of get the bolt lined up as far as left and right. Then what I found was that the alternator would sit a little bit too low, and if I just use the same screwdriver, move this and if I just slid the screwdriver underneath the alternator here, I could just kind of lift up on it a little bit and get it exactly in place while I'm still pressing. So I'd basically be pressing the bolt with my left hand, lifting up on it a little bit on the screwdriver with my right hand, and voila, the bolt went right in. So here's a little note regarding installation of the alternator. This is probably one of the trickier steps in the whole thing, because the trick is you have to get this bolt hole lined up, and you have to get the bottom bolt hole lined up. You can see it there. And you don't have front access of the alternator to actually view and see that the bolts are lined up. It's also wedged in there pretty tight, so it's a little tricky to move. What I found the most effective way to do this, a little note for you, is I would just use a little mirror, and if you can see down through here, you can kind of use the mirror to see if those bolt holes are lined up. This one's looking pretty good on the top. And when I get one lined up, I would put the bolt in and kind of secure at least that pivot point. Then the bottom one is a little bit trickier, but using the same kind of principle. And right now you can see if I can get the mirror lined up just right. You can kind of see that this one isn't lined up yet. So with the top part kind of anchored, it'll be a bit easier to move that alternator around and get that bottom bolt hole lined up. And to be honest, the way I did it so that I could slowly, incrementally kind of shift it around into position is I actually used a pretty long pry bar on the bottom of the alternator, not to put a huge load onto it, not to really push it around a lot, but so that I could have very fine control in shifting that alternator around. And that's what I found to be the most successful way to kind of get it into position. Because again, I really don't want to put these bolts in and cross thread them. I want to make sure that everything slides in just right. Now that the main bolts are out of the alternator and it's free from the main bracket, we have to remove the two lines that lead into the alternator. The first is a cable that comes into the backside, and it's attached via this 13mm hex on the back. Second thing that we do is remove this wiring harness. To do both of those things, after removing the bolts, it's easiest just to move it into this big void area here and work on it from the backside. That's what I found, and I found that it was easiest to take the hex bolt off first and then work on the wiring harness, because I found the wiring harness to be a little tricky. Okay, with the alternator free and the main line off of it, there's this last harness that just needs to be unclipped. I'll be honest, I struggled with this a little bit, but and it was easier to get the main line off first and then work with the wiring harness. So that's why I did it in that order. And it's have a little more access once it's out. You can move the alternator into a position that's easier to work on. Our next step is to disconnect the water pump from the main bracket that we're working on. There are basically, let's see, three main steps to this. First is we're going to remove the pulley from the power steering pump. That's done by, if you can barely see them, there are 3 Allen heads on the front of the pulley. We're just going to loosen those. Need a strap wrench or something like that. I've got a big chain wrench, as you can see up here, but a strap wrench probably will work just fine. I only have the big chain wrench, but a strap wrench would probably be more convenient, and those Allen heads really aren't on that tight, so a strap wrench should work fine. So we're going to disconnect, we're going to remove the front pulley, then behind it you'll see that there are 3 13mm just hex head bolts that get removed, and then lastly, you can see it, there is an Allen bolt on the back side that we remove too, and then the power steering pump is free of the main bracket. A little note when you reassemble it, when you're putting these Allen heads back on the front, just put them on gently first until you have all 3 seated. They're a little tricky to line up, so if you just put one in loose and then to hold it in place and then jiggle the others, and to be honest, it's easier to get them started from the bottom than from the top. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is remove the power steering pump, the front 3 bolts that hold the power steering pump in place. There are 4 bolts that hold it in place, 3 in the front. As you can see, looking in from the top, you can see the first bolt that we're going to remove. They're all 13mm on the front here. We're going to remove this one. The other 2 we're going to remove from the bottom because, trust me, they're a lot easier to reach from the bottom than reaching from the top. Underneath the water pump right now, and we're going to remove these 2 13mm bolts. One right here, and the other one just past it. It's actually above it. From the angle that this video is being shot, it looks a little weird, but they're actually stacked above each other. Just 13mm, just like the one on the top, and once that's done, we'll just have the Allen bolt behind it, and the power steering pump will be free. I mean, the water pump will be free. Now that we got the 3 bolts off the front of the water pump, we're going to take this last Allen bolt right there. We're going to take that off of the back. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to disconnect the big aluminum bracket that the bearing is in. We're going to disconnect it from this support. This you kind of see it's a long steel support that supports the intake manifold. There is a bolt down here at the bottom, which you can see I've already started to loosen up. There's also a bolt at the top that you'll just have to loosen. You don't have to remove. This bolt, the bottom bolt, you're going to remove because it is attached to that big aluminum bracket. The top of the bolt here, the top of this steel, this black steel pole can actually stay in. You just loosen up the bolt so that this brace can swing free. Okay, we're at the last step really to get the bracket out, and that is removing the 6 bolts that hold it in. The way we're going to do that is we're going to remove these 2 bolts right here. You can see the A on that one. You might be able to see the B label there. You can then see, so A and B right there. You can see C right here, and then over here to the side you can see, so I'm going to tuck the camera down here. Okay, you can see 2. Now these 2 bolts, only the top bolt needs to come out. The other bolt actually does not hold the bracket in. Okay. Lastly, we need to take 2 bolts out from underneath that are hidden from view. You just do that from the underside. Take the under tray off, and they're pretty accessible. You just take those 2 out, and the whole bracket is going to just drop down out through the bottom. It's very unobstructed, and the key to that, make sure that it drops down, is just make sure that the water pump there, right here, make sure that the water pump is placed above this bracket here, and then the whole thing will just drop down nice and easily. Okay, we're getting pretty close now, and if you see where the blade of the screwdriver is, there's a little metal clip onto the bracket that we're going to take off, and it's connected to this wire we're just going to slide the wire out of the bracket. We're not going to worry about taking the metal bracket off of the primary bracket we're trying to remove. We're just going to slide the wire off. Okay, very quickly you can see these are the two underside bolts. There's one here and one here. They're actually very accessible as long as you approach them from underneath, and that's all you have to do. Once you loosen those two out, this whole bracket will just drop right down out of the car. Real quick note, looking at this is the bracket taken all the way out, and importantly what you can see is that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different bolt holes. The top 4, labeled here A through D, all can be accessed through the top side of the engine. E and F are the last two and are really only accessible from the bottom of the engine, and I would suggest that you take those out last because you're going to lower the bracket out through the bottom of the engine anyway, and it's easiest to support it from below. So as I took all the bolts out of the brackets, they are different sizes, so to keep them all in order, what you might be able to see here is that I actually labeled each one of the bolts with a letter and then put them kind of in order on this piece of paper towel. Most importantly, that on the bracket itself, then once I got it out, I lettered out each of the holes. That way, first of all, I know that I got all the bolts still, and secondly, make sure to keep each bolt with the specific hole that it came from earlier. That way, some of these different length bolts won't get confused. So here we got the bracket back from the machine shop. They did a great job pressing in the new bearing. As you can even see, they were nice enough to put the snap ring back in, which saved me a big pain because that would be pretty tricky otherwise. And they sent back the old bearing, which you can finally get a really good view of here, which you can see is completely missing some balls out of it and everything. You can see that there are some balls even missing out of one side of the bearing race. The race had, as we showed you before, fully collapsed. So there it is. We're gonna put it all back inside now.